Howdy, Ralph here, talking about PCC General Education Signature Assignment Design Ideas. First off, if you have any questions, Ann and I made a Google form to collect some of them. Hopefully, if we get a few before the SAC meeting on Tuesday, while we're all working on this work during breakout rooms, we can come out and talk to people individually and talk through some of those questions. Of course, there's going to be questions about the GEARS course approval process for general education list. Ann described it in her video, but there's lots of details. And any questions about the quantitative reasoning rubric, Ann described it. I'll also describe it because it's key to be familiar with that rubric. And or signature assignment design, you can ask us, and any other questions or comments on your mind about all of this work are welcome as well. Okay, my plan is to give us a PCC General Education Assessment instructor's point of view. If you teach or plan to teach or hope to teach a PCC General Education math course, right now, that's all of our courses on at the 100 and 200 level, but as a SAC and as CCOG subcommittees, we've only decided to submit some of our courses to the new general education list. That's Math 105, 111, 112, 243, 244, 251, and 252. So if you're teaching or plan to teach or hope to teach those courses, you will need to be prepared to submit student work to academic affairs on a signature assignment with an assignment map and accessibility checklist described by Ann in her video for scoring by the Learning Assessment Council using the PCC Quantitative Reasoning Outcome and Rubric, QR Rubric for short. This video's goal is to, hey Zoom user, this video's goal is to share some practical ideas to help us get this work done. Ann showed us the rubric in her video, and it really is key if you're going to be teaching classes on the general education list to get familiar with the quantitative reasoning rubric. I'm not going to go into details, as many as Ann did in this document. I will mention that the levels of achievement, when I was on the discipline subject area committee, I was among the people trying to parse out these levels. Really, level 3 described success to me for most of these dimensions on the rubric. So when I'm reading through here, I focus on level 3, and it looks the most like the general descriptions of the rubric dimensions as well. Let's look at the most important things on this rubric in a little more detail. The quantitative reasoning outcome statement is: analyze questions or problems that impact the community and or environment using quantitative information. That might be challenging for some of us in mathematics, even in statistics, if we haven't made it part of our work to find applied problems that are meaningful. So it can be a challenge. The rubric dimensions, there are 6 stated quickly: state the problem, determine information, representation, interpretation, draw conclusions, and think about community and or environmental implications. Let's look at each of those in a little more detail. First, students need to state problems or questions clearly and with disciplinary context. That's not a natural for me as a math and stats teacher. Usually I state the problem. Now it's kind of turned around for me to figure out how to have students do that. Second, determine information needed, identifying and describing information needed to solve a stated problem or answer a stated question. Again, in mathematics and statistics, we are often given information. Here, we need to learn how to ask students to describe necessary information. I'll come back to this one in an example later. 3, representation. Convert data or other information into mathematical form. Hey, all right, there's one that we all have been doing for our entire careers. Woo. 4, interpretation. Convert information presented in mathematical form into words. Woohoo! Another one that we've pretty much all been doing for our entire careers. Not hard to find in the coursework our students are already doing. 5 as well, draw conclusions. Develop evidence-based conclusions that consider all relevant data or other information while acknowledging limitations of the data or information. Pretty close to what we already do when we have a problem in a life or realistic situation and we ask for a thoughtful conclusion. Last, 6, consider how problems or questions in these disciplines affect the wider community and or the environment. That calls on us to have work in all of these courses that address these kinds of implications. And our colleagues in the sciences and computer science, along with a librarian and folks in academic affairs and Learning Assessment Council, really believed that this was key for PCC and our quantitative reasoning outcome. Okay, basics of signature assignment design, and discussed some of these, but they need to be emphasized, I think. Each signature assignment must be genuine coursework in your class every quarter. Of course, as the quarters pass, you can edit the work and change it and update it and improve it for your students' learning. Signature assignments must satisfy your own instructor course learning goals. They must consist of individual work from students. Assignments need to state outcomes and grading criteria using transparent assignment design, just being completely clear about what students are hoping to achieve and how you're going to score that. You can refer to the CCOG, the Quantitative Reasoning Rubric, or your own instructor goals. And last, don't forget, work needs to be able to be scored by the Learning Assessment Council using that Quantitative Reasoning Rubric, which involves that assignment map and the accessibility check. Now, how to design a signature assignment for math. That's the big piece of this video. It's a lot of introductory material, but this is the idea that we want to get at. Academic Affairs has hosted a few workshops over the last few years. A few Math SAC members have been able to take advantage of those. I took one on backward design 2 years ago, I believe. James Sauls took one that had backward design concepts and transparent design concepts in it. So he had an updated version, I think last year. But in reality, this is work that those of us who need a signature assignment in our course are gonna have to do at some point. So my idea and Anne's idea and our co-chairs of our SAC support the idea is to get this work done at SAC Day. This is the place where we all get paid for curricular work. It's clear that each general education course is going to need one signature assignment to submit to Gears and describe the process really well in her video. And for ourselves as individual instructors, we're going to need as many signature assignments as we need. The one that gets approved by Gears may not work. In fact, is unlikely to work for every instructor with their individual course rhythm, style, and goals. So all of us should be prepared to get one of these together. So the idea is, let's get as many signature assignments as possible started at SAC Day this spring. Here's some ideas. Let's start with ideas about backward design that were shared with me at the workshop I attended. The workshop, again, was led by Jamie Kristen, who's a sociology instructor at Rock Creek. Here's a quotation from vanderbilt.edu. Deliberate and focused instructional design requires us as teachers and curriculum writers to make an important shift in our thinking about the nature of our job. The shift involves thinking a great deal first about the specific learnings sought and the evidence of such learnings before thinking about what we, as the teacher, will do or provide in learning and teaching activities. And I read 2 of those words backwards, but it sure was a long paragraph. That really is backward when you consider that when, say, I got my first teaching job out at Mount Hood Community College, I wasn't asked to think about specific learning sought or the evidence that might be required. I was handed a course content guide that told me what teaching and learning activities were expected and how I was expected to assess them. That's how our CCOGs look today. They're a list of things we cover and discuss and teach and students learn and develop their understanding of, and a suggested list of assessment techniques, exams, portfolios, etc. Backward design can be summarized a little more briefly. Jamie also shared this slide at that workshop. So just step one, identify desired results, the big ideas and skills we're interested in. Step two, determine acceptable evidence of those. That could be any kind of assessment task, an examination, a project, a presentation, a journal, a portfolio, a single homework assignment, multiple homework assignments, whatever makes sense to you to get evidence of student learning. And last, three, plan learning experiences and instruction, those learning events that are going to get students to the point where they can succeed with those assessments. It's a great way to think about our teaching whenever you want to reset or rethink how you teach a topic. This is a great thing to learn more about. I strongly suggest learning more. But for us, with this process and the quantitative reasoning rubric, there are some obvious issues with backward design. The desired results described in step one are not ours as individual instructors. They're right there on the quantitative reasoning rubric. We had, as a math SAC, some input into rubric design, but the math representatives to the rubric design team were outnumbered over 10-1 in decisions. So the sciences really guided the rubric with minimal effect from our ideas. Also, learning experiences and instruction, that's supposed to be step three that you're not even supposed to think about until 2 steps are done. Well, those are already happening every day in our classes. We already do our work, and we shouldn't be expected to recreate our courses from scratch just because the college is handing us a rubric. That would just be terrible. And that's not what the college wants. But I think still, the backward design ideas can be really useful with a little rethinking. Let me show you how I rethought them. I'm calling it backward design. Catchy? I'm gonna grab my Zoom tool here. So draw your eyes. The backward design does not start here at step one. It starts down at the bottom. So there's a little bonus arrow to draw your attention. Start here at the bottom. The learning events are the things that are already happening in our classes. So the first step is identify coursework that you already have your students do that matches as much of that rubric as possible. There are 6 dimensions on it. If you can find an assignment or a quiz or an exam that in your judgment is meeting 3, maybe 4, heck, 5, or even all 6 rubric dimensions, you're off to a terrific start. If you've got an assignment that only meets 2, you're off to a start. Heck, if you've got a couple of different assignments that together meet 3, 4, or 5 rubric dimensions, you're off to a great start. So the next step, once you think about those rubric dimensions in terms of the coursework your students are doing, head up the ladder now, and then think about, okay, let's just edit the coursework we've already got and make those rubric prompts as clear as we can. For our students, for the Learning Assessment Council persons who will score the work, and for ourselves. That editing process, I'll show you an example of how I'm doing it soon. And then when we're done, keep climbing the ladder up here. We'll go up the ladder again. Now, instead of letting the big ideas and skills really drive our entire design, because it didn't make sense, at least now, if we've done all that editing and put it together, we've got our signature assignment that is ready to score by the Learning Assessment Council. The job is done. I have talked to Anne. The GEARS group have looked at signature assignments from various disciplines and departments so far. Sometimes they don't quite actually line up to the goals, of course, because it's a complicated process. And then GEARS might say, hey, this needs editing. At that point, we come back to the editing phase. And heck, if we completely missed a rubric dimension, you know, they're like, we don't think that you've successfully got students to 5, draw conclusions. We could even cruise all the way down to look back into the original coursework and think about expanding on the questions. So we can go up and down the process of backward design to get the work ready to go. Okay, now that's a lot of kind of abstract ideas about assignment design. Let me clear out those arrows. So I've got an example here of backward design. I thought about my statistics course, the course I teach the most, and the one for which I'm probably most ready to think about this work of designing a signature assignment. And I went through and I found we have a capstone project. And a couple years ago, we studied housing insecurity in the context of a book called Evicted and Related Issues. Let me show you, there's links here on this slide to 3 documents. The first is the original assignment that I wrote without knowing anything about this rubric. There you go. It's a nice looking statistics assignment. First task here asks students to make a table, make a graphical display of some categorical data. Second task focuses their attention on, if you want to talk about rental history, what denominator makes sense. And then once we're getting into that discussion and we know what denominator makes sense, they can go through and start to count things and calculate various probabilities. Task 3, huge topic in stats courses is independent events. So they're looking at if eviction and being late with rent payments are independent in a statistical sense via probability calculations, and looking for explanations of differences in meanings of various symbols and things like that. Conclusions right there in step 9. There you go. And then the last step of the project, I asked them to sort of do it all again, but now look at eviction and homelessness as variables. Are they independent in a statistical sense, at least in this data set? Okay, great project. It's got some community implications kind of already in it, as far as I can tell. Lots of statistical thinking, so let's see how it works. What I did was, I read those rubric dimensions more earlier this week. I'd forgotten what they were after a year of not seeing them, since I didn't work on the discipline subject area committee anymore. I read them again. I talked to Anne about them. So look around for people who have some sense of how these work. And then I went back through this assignment to make a general education draft of the assignment. The first thing I did was I wrote some outcomes at the top for some transparent assignment design, just as much for myself as for students and for the Learning Assessment Council scorers. I tried to use the language of the rubric dimensions, represent and interpret categorical data using tables and graphs. I could throw in probabilities right there as well. Identify and calculate probabilities, draw conclusions, consider relationships between stuff in our community. So I'm trying to get some of the language of the rubric into the assignment. And then as I went down through the assignment, every task I asked them to do, I just asked myself, which rubric dimension does it match best? First 2 tasks matched the representation goal. The second task actually had 2 questions. One of them was interpretation, so I just broke up the question into more than one question. I said earlier, I'd use this determine information needed to be the kind of one I'm curious about. You can see there that what denominator should be used for probabilities involving rental history. Why? It really is asking them to identify the information necessary and to do so in a thoughtful way. That why gives you some reasoning behind that. So hopefully that will be a question that will score my students a strong score using that rubric. I went through the rest of the assignment. I won't go through in detail. And representation for calculations, interpretation comes up again and again in a stats class. More determining information, drawing conclusions comes up. And dimension 6, community implications, I thought would be there, but it was only there implicitly. I ended up just adding a question for that dimension, asking in more detail about their ideas about how statistical independence aligns with their understanding of relationships of late rent and eviction out in our community. So a pretty interesting process. The last task I left wide open originally to give students a chance to use the process again in their own style, considering that this is driven by transparent design and asking students to be clear and having the outcomes guide things, I could as well use some of the outcomes to drive a rewriting of the problem with more detailed questions. So a really interesting process for me to rethink the assignment. It was actually kind of fun. Okay. And then there's the assignment map piece. Going back to this determine information needed rubric thing, let me just grab that question. I'm going to copy it. And if we look at the assignment map for the Learning Assessment Council, Anne showed the path to download this document. And you just make a copy of a Google document to get your own copy. At the top, you just mention your course, your assignment title, a little bit of context for your assignment. It can be very brief as you can make it. And then there it is. What denominator should be used for probabilities involving rental history and why? It's just right there with its problem number. And I'd give a brief description here in this box for a scorer, what I expect a good answer to look like, so they'll know how to use the rubric for this problem. Whoa. I think once I got going, I could probably complete this assignment map in less than an hour. And that might be my personal goal for my work on at SAC Day to try to start an assignment and see how much I can map as well. So, but I'm hoping that for us as a group, if we can get to this point at the SAC Day here in spring, you have something looking like a draft with some ideas of how these various rubric dimensions might match work your students are already doing. You'll be doing amazing work and again, getting paid to do it. Okay, there's links to all those documents in my slides, which you'll have. And again, the reminders about signature assignment design, a prompt for every quantitative reasoning rubric dimension should come up at some point in the assignment. James did tell me that portfolios are okay. So an instructor who's comfortable with building a map that references multiple assignments will have no problem using more than one assignment for their signature assignment. Could be more than one. Score the work for your class as you like. That should be clear on the assignment that's student facing. You can use elements of the quantitative reasoning rubric if you like or not. Again, the reminder, general education math course approval to the new general education list by the Gears group is described well by Anne in her video. Tons of details. Make sure you understand the process if you're going to be involved in that as a CCOG committee member. And then once on the general education list, individual instructors will submit to academic affairs when requested, not always, a signature assignments, student work, so-called artifacts whenever requested, the assignment map for the Learning Assessment Council to help with scoring, and that accessibility checklist. I didn't get into the details of that, but it's not bad at all. If you're using universal design principles, it's gonna just check off very quickly and it'll catch something you might have missed, which is really nice. Okay, last slide has a lot on it, but just I wanna make sure we're thinking about SAC Day and this work as a flipped experience. The goal is to develop general education signature assignment drafts, something like what I got started on in that example for all of these courses. Before SAC Day, if possible, I'm hoping you'll have a chance to identify some coursework that matches that rubric or at least a few of the dimensions. More than one assessment is okay. If you're missing a few quantitative rubric dimensions, start thinking backwards design style about how you might augment that assignment to meet more dimensions, or heck, just brainstorm some coursework ideas that would match as many dimensions as you can think of. At our SAC meeting, you'll be getting paid to edit and adapt coursework to the quantitative reasoning rubric. You can work individually or collaborate, whatever works best for you. As far as I know, the plan is that we'll all end up in breakout rooms, and from there we can figure out what's working best for us individually. After SAC Day, each instructor for general education bound math courses on the list need to decide how to complete our own signature assignment for our course or courses. It really does fall on us individually at some point. CCOG committees will decide how to proceed with Gears approval for the individual courses headed that direction. Whew, this video was much longer than the initial 10 minutes I thought I wanted it to be, but I'm hoping it's valuable to you. If you're not watching it this week, maybe you're watching it next year and getting some help designing a signature assignment for your class if you just don't like the one that ended up being the one approved by Gears in that process for your work. Hope it helps. Thank you to Ann Carey and James Sauls for sharing ideas and experiences that really illuminated my thinking about assignment design in this process. Our SAC co-chairs, Candace and Amy, have made space for this work during our meeting. I'm hoping that we can continue to do so next year as needed so people can get paid for this work. And of course, thank you for doing the best you can to keep up with everything in your life and in your teaching during really unprecedented times. I wish you health and strength, and all the love in my heart is with you. All right, bye-bye.